Thank you, Dr. Tuttle, for coming. It's great. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Glenn White. Glenn is my advisor in applied behavioral science, and he recruited me to come out to Kansas many years ago. Glenn has been a friend, an advocate, and an advisor. He teaches a course on independent living in the Department of Applied Behavioral Science, which is an excellent course and probably the closest we have to a disability studies course, but constantly gets great evaluations, and people, I think it is a life-changing course. I know a lot of people going into human services come out with a very different view of disability in society as a result of taking that course. Glenn also was on the lawn at the White House in 1990 when the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed. He's been involved in disability issues for many, many years. About as many as I have. Glenn, please welcome Dr. Glenn White.
It's great to be here. It's a great historic occasion to be able to have our place, if you will, and along with the other areas, topic areas that deal with so many different issues facing us as human beings. I was thinking, Dot, as you were talking about that, I invited Dot to come here from Syracuse, saying it's much colder there, much warmer here in Kansas. I'm looking over here at the football stadium. I says, I got 2 tickets to come to the football game. You know, you'll love it. We went that weekend. It happened to be like one of the coldest weekends in October. She said, if it's this warm, I don't know if I want to come. Well, I'm really excited to be here for the installation of this segment or the section of disability here in the bookstores. And I think, as Dr. Tuttle mentioned earlier, we do have kind of a historical view. And a lot of things, history teaches us many things, and we can hopefully learn from history, although we don't always, unfortunately. But I'd like to talk just a little bit about a couple of the books that I use as reference in the course I teach on independent living and people with disabilities. And I have a few students here actually today coming on their own volition, I think, mostly. And a little extra credit. We know the contingencies, don't we, guys? But there's a couple books that were written by a gentleman I had a chance to meet in Washington. His name is Hugh Gallagher. And we oftentimes don't hear the rest of the story, so to speak, as Paul Harvey used to talk about. One of the books that Hugh wrote was called By Trust Betrayed. And it's called Patients, Physicians, and the License to Kill in the Third Reich. Now, oftentimes we've heard of the Holocaust, right? Who here has not heard of the Holocaust? Well, everybody heard. What we don't recognize is really the Holocaust started with this action called Action T4, and that was kind of a systematic extermination of people with disabilities. And they were brought to sanitariums where they thought they were being brought in, and what they basically were, they started perfecting the gassing and the cremation right there. And so this, he does an excellent job of a historical analysis of what happened. And we recognize if we can't stop the actions at that level, it just keeps ratcheting up to other populations. So they started off with the most vulnerable. Another more recent book that Hugh did was called FDR's Splendid Deception. Now, one of the things is you look at FDR, very interesting, a very excellent documentary done on PBS, and if you had a chance to see that, really interesting, wasn't it? But one of the things that the press back then, they weren't as quite the paparazzi kind of press as they are nowadays, but they kept the issue of FDR as far as having a disability very, very low key. There's only 1 or 2 pictures that have actually ever been published with FDR in a wheelchair. And if you go into if you ever get out a chance, I really encourage you to go out to the new FDR monument out in Washington, D.C. It's kind of on the great title page in there. But it does have a picture of the wheelchair, or actually the actual wheelchair that he sat in. It's kind of a model of an old wooden chair with just some wheels kind of stuck underneath it. But one of the things I thought was kind of interesting in the book, they talked about he had to go to a funeral of a governor in the southern states, and the Secret Service built a platform that his car drove up onto, level with the State House, so he wouldn't be seen either carried into the State House or walking in. So he had long, heavy leg braces that he often had somebody kind of accompany him, helping him. But this gives a really interesting insight into how disability was really viewed back then. And if you really think about FDR, he really did help create some wonderful policies, beginning policies to help change the lives of people with disabilities. Well, so I'm glad that these are part of the stock that they have here, among others. There was another book I wanted to talk about. It's on a handbook of disability studies. It was 10 pounds, and I didn't feel like lugging it up here. But that's another very, very excellent view. It's got about 32 different chapters in it talking about different issues facing people with disabilities, going right back to historical viewpoint. How are people with disabilities viewed back in the old days? Almost like if you had a demon in you, and they had different kinds of really wild things that they would do to try to quote-unquote cure them. And there's some other books that have a more contemporary view. One of them is by a colleague, a friend of ours, Joe Shapiro. Now, if any of you listen to NPR, if you are, you're probably like me, kind of an NPR junkie. He often does segments on NPR, National Public Radio, and don't forget to give to the pledge drive to KPR. But Joe has written a very excellent book, kind of analyzing what kinds of things have happened more in a more contemporary fashion regarding the ADA and other civil rights laws that have been passed for people with disabilities. Recognizing just because you have a law passed doesn't necessarily mean that it's enforced. So there's still a lot of other issues that are facing us. I think, folks, disability, if you think about it, is really a fact of life, right? And it touches all of our lives. You know, some of us here may have a friend or a family member or somebody that we love that has a disability. Here's the truth for you, folks. Medical science is helping us to live longer, right? And as we live longer, we are going to come in encounter with some kind of a disabling condition. Some of us just got there a little faster than the rest of you did. So we just have to recognize that I think it's good to embrace this literature and recognize that there's 54 million Americans with disabilities. There is a lot of wonderful literature that is out there. There's some wonderful heroes. Ed Roberts, the CD that we've been having on the screen here, was known as the father of independent living. Did some really wonderful things. I have to say, echo Dr. Tuttle's point about the changes within our own university setting, I think, as far as our viewpoints of disability. Marianne and her team have done a wonderful job, I think, in really helping raise that bar, you know, as far as services to people with disabilities, and I want to give kudos to you all for that. So the time is very appropriate for this section to be installed, and I applaud all that did that. Dot, I want to give you credit for really having the vision to be able to pull this off, and I want to thank Lisa Eitner as well from the bookstores here for being able to have the vision also to purchase and embrace these. So I just want to thank you all for coming here, and we've got to continue to celebrate and hold this issue of disability high. Thank you.